everyone and welcome back to my channel Beth Chats Books. Now today I am going to do my April wrap up. So I finally got a day where nobody is in the house, my sister's not working from home, my boyfriend has gone to work and I have a day off while he's at work for once. So I thought I could film this video. It's probably going to be quite long because, get me, I managed to overachieve on my TBR, so I'm really happy about that. I think Dewey's 24-hour readathon helped me get some more reading done, but surprisingly it was just a very productive month, which usually doesn't happen. So, you know, pat on the back again, well done me again. If you hear some purring, by the way, the cat is right underneath me. He will not move, so I've had to just shuffle as best I can. This is usually my seat, slightly more that way, but I've had to angle the camera this way because, you know, he's looking at me now. He's literally looking at me like, how dare you try and sit next to me? But I want to film, buddy, so, you know, I've had to share the space, and that's what you've got to do with cats. Anyway, ramble over. I managed to read 10 books this month. One was a DNF, but let's just get on with this wrap up. So, this book was officially finished in March, but the 31st of March, so just on the borderline, and I obviously didn't include it because I wanted to do its separate review, but I re-watched my March wrap up and it wasn't there, so I'm just going to mention it in this one and class it as this month. And that is Tessa Hadley's Bad Dreams. Now I did a book review on this, which I'll link down below or insert a card or do something so that you can go and check that out. So I'm not going to say too much about this. I mentioned previously that the stories had some great concepts. She's a very strong writer, but they weren't executed how I wanted. They didn't have any kind of drama. And that sounds really silly, like I expect drama from short stories, but these were just oversimplistic. And with short stories, what I personally have come to realise that I want from a short story collection is a little bit of saucy, a little bit of juicy, a little bit of maybe dark, something, some kind of substance. And so when a plot is a little bit flat, and this collection had a lot of very flat moments where I was expecting something to happen and it had been written in a way that most people would have read it and expected something to happen and it didn't, it was a bit lackluster. So I believe I gave this 3 out of 5 stars, maybe 2.5 now on contemplation. So between 2.5 and 3 out of 5 stars. It wasn't great, but you know, I read it and it was very easy to get through. The writing was good, it's just the stories were a little bit meh for me. And then the next book I want to talk about, you've also seen me do a review of it, so I won't go into too much detail again, and that is Things We Nearly Knew by Jim Powell. Now, I gave this 5 out of 5 stars. I stand by that. I loved that story. The characters were fantastic. I loved that there was this complicated relationship between the husband and wife, the main protagonists in this story, and then when characters like Arlene came on the scene, and I think it's Jimmy. No, it's Frankie. Jimmy, Frankie, whatever. So when Frankie came on the scene and Arlene, they made the relationship between the married couple more complex. I love that it's this deadbeat American town where nothing really happens and it just focused on the characters. I like character-driven plots where there's kind of secrets in the marriage, there's secrets between the relationships they have with the people that frequent their bar. For example, Arlene and Frankie are the main two who drive the plot forward. It has some great twists and turns, some you saw coming, others are a little bit more subtle, but it was well executed. It gave me Revolutionary Road vibes, which is one of my all-time favourite books. I adore that book. If you read this book or you've read Revolutionary Road, my taste is sometimes I don't mind if the book is harrowing or dark, but if I can really get into characters and their motives enthrall me, even if they are bad choices or complex choices, then I'm all about it and I'm fascinated by it. So 5 out of 5 stars. And if you kind of like Revolutionary Road, you like characters and maybe dissecting marriages or important relationships, then that might be for you. And there's a complexity between characters in here that I really enjoyed. So there's that one. And then later on in the month, due to Jasmine from Jasmine Reads, who's one of my all-time favourites here on BookTube, we're very good friends, she has been on this hype for so long, and so I finally got around to reading this book, and that is Everything I Never Told You by Celeste Ning. Now, Celeste Ning is Jasmine's new rave of life. She just absolutely adores Celeste Ning, and she's been telling everyone on BookTube, including me, get your ass into gear and check Celeste Ning out. So I did with this book, and I was pleasantly surprised. This is not at all what I expected from this book. Now, I was of the opinion that this was going to be quite thriller-esque, and it's not really a whodunit, it is a whydunit, which I have come to understand that I enjoy just as much as a whodunit, maybe slightly more because there's a complexity there that's very interesting. This book kind of goes backwards, so we learn about the main protagonist, Lydia's death at the beginning, and then it spans out to each of her individual family members, their relationship to Lydia, the circumstances where they're going. And this book, I know I mentioned a couple of videos ago about book auras, and I will do a video on it now. A lot of people have said that they were interested, so that's great. This is an example of a book that, yes, the content was sad, but the vibe I got was very intensely melancholy in this book. Now, lots of people will say, of course, you know, it's about parents dealing with grief, but some books don't have that undertone. But this one I think I didn't love as much as Jasmine. I think I gave this 4 out of 5 stars, but I didn't give it the full 5 because there was this dripping intensity between the parents' relationships, between the relationship between Lydia and her parents, how there's an aspect of the parents feeling they've let her down and she was constantly thinking she didn't live up to their expectations. There's just this intensity of sadness that usually in different circumstances I would really revel and enjoy, but it made my reading experience slightly harder with this book because it confronts a lot of things and faults between a parental relationship to their child and the child's relationship to parents. There was a real truth there that I think was kind of shocking and ultimately intense for me, so I think I loved it, but I found that the intensity of melancholy and of regret and of pain in this book did make me overwhelmed, is the best way to describe it. I loved it, I loved this book, but it did overwhelm me a little bit. Some people will read this and say I never got that, but the relationship and the mulling between both parents' individual relationship to one another in the book, but also their relationship to Lydia, is very intense and it's ultimately very sad. So it kind of stopped me from loving it as much because I did have to take kind of emotional breaks from this book. But I did love it, so I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. If you love Little Fires Everywhere, then I know you're going to love this book. I haven't read Little Fires Everywhere myself personally, but I'm getting to it after reading this because I love the individual dissecting of the characters and their relationship to one another. I really like that style, and I've heard that the same kind of approach happens in Little Fires Everywhere. But this is really great and I'm really excited to read Little Fires Everywhere and decide which will be ultimately my favourite and if I get the same kind of melancholy vibe from Little Fires Everywhere. But yeah, it's a fantastic writer. Jasmine is very justified to be singing her praises. It is a very good book and I would recommend this to pretty much anyone. So there's that one. And then the next book I read is my DNF, I believe. So this is the only DNF I had this month, and that is The Secret Barrister, which is by an anonymous author. So that makes me feel a little bit better about the slight rant that I'm probably going to go into now. So it was fascinating in terms of learning a little bit more about the criminal legal system. So it's obviously somebody who is a practicing barrister in the UK, and it was quite interesting for some of his explanations about why he thinks our criminal justice system is letting down individuals, and he would mention a few cases, but obviously the names had been changed. However, ultimately the book was very stuffy. It's about 7 hours and a half long, and I did read about 5 hours, so I did give it a very good stab, but it was very repetitive of very stuffy legal commentary, and a lot of the stuff was explaining this is why this is wrong, we're not training barristers properly, their workloads are too much, the digital age has affected this, which are all very valid points, but this is more of a letter you would write to Parliament or something you would discuss on a news show. I think in terms of a non-fiction book, it was just slightly too dry for me. I just wanted a kind of non-academic introduction into it maybe. I was expecting more juicy case studies, a little bit more of a it sounds really bad, but a little bit more of like a Jeremy Kyle / Judge Rinder kind of vibe. I wanted something a little bit juicy, you know, spice it up, because I'm fascinated by criminology, but criminal law is a little bit more dry for me. So I wanted to be informed, and I got a little bit more than I asked for, I think, for that. So I had to DNF it because it was just tedious, and I thought to myself, if I'm ploughing through it on the way to work and I'm not enjoying it, I'm zoning off, forcing myself to finish it, what is the point? So I requested my credit back on Audible and I got it. So if you're interested, go and check it out, but it was just not my cup of tea, unfortunately. And then to palate cleanse myself and to feel a little bit better and to get back on that reading horse, I picked up Shirley Jackson's The Missing Girl. Now these are 3 short stories by Shirley Jackson. What do I need to say? Everyone's heard of her. She's fantastic and she's very well renowned. So I have read The Lottery by Shirley Jackson. I read that a while ago now, and I thought I really want to see where she goes with it because she usually does great plot twists. Now I think in the end I gave this 3 out of 5 stars. If not on my Goodreads, then I will now. I'll change it because I do appreciate, after finishing it, her talent. She's got one of those writing styles that even in The Lottery, it was kind of like, I really don't want to like it. I don't like her style. But then at the end, she just throws a bomb in there that you're like, oh wow, that was really clever. You know, so The Lottery is a perfect example of that. All the way through, you're thinking, oh my God, this is such a laborious short story. Who cares? And then at the end, you're like, oh, what? And these stories were kind of like that. So The Nightmare, which was the last one, seemed to be the most intriguing. And there wasn't any conclusion to it, which I kind of like, because afterwards you're thinking, I don't really get that. But that's the point, you know? So that one was very interesting. And The Missing Girl and Journey with a Lady were okay. She's a very good writer, and maybe it's an age difference, maybe it's the time period she wrote this in, and I'm finding it harder to connect with that. But I can only remember Nightmare out of this collection especially vividly, and that's because it was a bit bizarre and out there. So I do have a love-hate relationship with Shirley Jackson's short stories in particular. I hate them and I hate to love them. So I want to try and read a novel of hers and see if that changes. So if anybody could recommend a great novel of Shirley Jackson's to start with, or if anybody feels kind of the same way about me about her short story collections, that you have a bit of a jarring relationship with them, but they are talented stories nonetheless, then I'd love to have a conversation with you in the comments down below about it. Equally, if you love this collection and think I'm out of my brain for thinking it wasn't that good, then you know, you can go and harass me down in the comments about that. So there is that book. The next book I read is Eleanor Oliphant is Completely Fine by Gail Honeyman. Now, this one was a massive surprise. So this is a very, very long book for the subject matter. I personally thought this book was too long, too drawn out, slight exaggeration of where it should have gone. I didn't feel like it stayed on the realistic tracks. And what has fascinated me since finishing this is I had a conversation with both my mother and my auntie, who were racing to read this because, like me, they thought it would be highly acclaimed. It's been raved on BookTube. They thought it'd be fantastic, and they were just as disappointed as I was, so that's interesting. I think I gave this 3, maybe 3.5 out of 5 stars. I didn't enjoy it, which I thought I was going to. I really loved the idea that loneliness and depression and isolation are mentioned in this book. I think that's fantastic. But I don't think it should be credited enough just purely because it includes that. The book is split into 2, her good days and her bad days, and she is the first protagonist I've read in a while that I just don't like. I just really don't like her. The way she would communicate with people was very detached. She wouldn't look people in the eye. She would have very clinical answers to things. She didn't take social cues very well. That it made me wonder if Gail Honeyman had on purpose created a character that might have been slightly autistic to just interest the reader, or whether she was just making a character that was rude. I couldn't really identify and pick that one out. So if anybody else got a similar vibe to me, then please let me know in the comment section down below. But I just really want to explicitly say I have nothing negative to say about anybody who's autistic. I think it would be fascinating, and I would have so much more respect for an author who admitted that they would make an autistic character. I can't decide if she had some kind of social issue or whether she was just rude. I just didn't like the way this character was speaking and addressing to other people. It bordered on rude, and I'm just making this reference to understand whether there was a reason for that. The bad days, I really didn't enjoy these kind of spiralling out of control where there wasn't really a trigger for it. The most interesting thing was the man in her life that she meets in this book, and I just wanted him to have a great break because he put up with a lot with her. It just really, it just wasn't my cup of tea, and I heard a lot of people who I respect enjoyed this, so I'd love to know what you think about this. Great idea, but just not a great character development for me, and I think if I don't like the main character, I'm never really gonna love a book, so there's that one. And then the next book I read was Exit West by Mohsin Hamid. Now, I really liked The Reluctant Fundamentalist, which Hamid wrote a good few years ago now. And I thought I was really going to enjoy this. It's really short, so it was quite easy to get through. So I thought, oh, I'm really going to enjoy this book. And truth be told, I didn't either. So I think I gave this 3 out of 5 stars as well. Now, this follows 2 main characters, Saeed and Nadia. And their relationship, they are in an unidentified country. It seems like the Middle East. They're living in a war zone, basically. And then these mysterious doors start appearing. First, people think it's a myth, but they transport you to another world. So they end up escaping the place that they're in, and they travel to Greece and to London and to America. And it kind of journeys their relationship, that each place they go complicates their relationship further. I also had a few problems with the characters in here. Most of the time when I don't enjoy a book, it's because the characters, are some way I haven't been able to connect with them. Now, Nadia in this book I didn't seem to connect very well with. I thought the way that she treated Saeed was disproportionate. There wasn't really this deep affection between the 2 characters. There was this anticipation that what threaded the book forward was that there was a deep affection between the 2 of them, but because I couldn't connect with that, I didn't believe it, the whole story kind of fell apart for me, because ultimately that's what it's about. I didn't like this door concept. I think it was great as a metaphor, but it was like splodging a bit of magical realism into a character-driven plot so that it doesn't really move the plot along. It wasn't really believable or important to me. It's just a background device to pull the plot forward a little bit, but the whole book hinged on their relationship. And because of the twist at the end, or the not so twist, it just kind of made the book deflated. There was nowhere to go with it. Just kind of the bottom fell out of the book. I'm giving it 3 out of 5 stars because the writing was good. There is a talent here. There is a great writer here. But just what was this book? Like, I don't get these doors. Like, I can enjoy magical realism like everyone, but it's not a magical realism book. And just random portal doors that they go through. It's just... I was expecting a really juicy, either contemporary about living in a war zone and community, or I was expecting some kind of historical novel. I don't know, I was expecting it to be, based on this cover, you know, as well, about living in a different world. But obviously they're trying to show the door there, which I didn't realise when I picked it up. But basically I'm just not buying it. I'm not buying it. Run of the mill. It wasn't poorly written, so I would only give 2 or less if it's a catastrophic book. And it wasn't catastrophic as in it was written well, but just the idea made no sense to me. So there's that one. And then the next one I want to talk about I took back to the library, and that is Burial Rites by Hannah Kent. Now, I gave this book 4 out of 5 stars. I might push it to 4.5 because upon finishing it, I loved it a lot more than I gave myself credit for. So it follows this main character, Agnes. Now, Hannah Kent travelled to Iceland a good few years before she wrote this book and was fascinated by a real character called Agnes, who was the last woman to be beheaded in Iceland for the murder of 2 gentlemen. And so she's used that as inspiration to make a fictional piece about what could have been the motivation, what could have happened in this scenario. And so in the actual book, I'm not sure if it's real life or not because I didn't do any research after this, but in the book there's another person with whom she is on trial for murder with, because he also kind of, I don't want to spoiler it, but he was present at the murder / active in the murders. I'm trying to be really like spoilery free and I'm just digging that hole. But anyway, it's fascinating because in this book, and I believe in real life, correct me if I'm wrong, if it's not factual, but apparently she has to go and live with a family in a farming village a few miles away from where the incident happened while she's awaiting her trial and her death. it was fascinating. I loved how the character of Agnes and the family that she lives with really encompass this Icelandic landscape. They are hard when they need to be. They are powerful. Their relationship to her really thaws out and develops in a really lovely way. The characters were completely believable. Family had a complexity that was important. Agnes's character was fascinating and a real honest depiction of someone who's terrified to face death, which I found really believable. What's interesting is this is an example of a book that didn't have overwhelmingly melancholy vibe to it. It's really confusing, I know, for you guys, but that book, it didn't overwhelm me. It was a very sad subject matter, but the way it was written was very engaging, so it didn't hit and overwhelm my emotion centres. It gave me a lot to contemplate and it fascinated me. It didn't overwhelm me. And it made me really interested to try and pick up some more Icelandic fiction because it was just fantastic. It was really interesting hearing about the landscape. So I think between 4 and 4 out of 5 stars for that book. I'm going to go with that because it was fantastic, and I will definitely be reading her other book, which I also noticed is in the library, so I might get that in my next library haul. So there's that one. And then I have another audiobook that I'm going to talk quickly about because I don't really have that much to say about it. And that is Inventing Ourselves by Sarah Jane Blakemore. I've mentioned this in other videos that I'll link down below. It's about the adolescent brain. That was about 7 hours long on Audible, which I listened to it on that. And it tells you a lot of case studies. It tells you about studies that were done. Sorry, I just flinched then, but it's the cat's leg on me. I forgot the cat was sitting next to me. I thought it was a spider. Anyway, what was I saying? Yes, so it's about, they do studies on rats, they do studies on teenage brains, there's MRI scans, there's all kind of clinical studies and results fluffling around all over the book, which I was interested in, but when you listen to it for 7 hours, it does get a little bit trying, so it was slightly too long, slightly too academic in tone for me. Also, maybe in the book, at the end of the pages, there's kind of a notes section, and sometimes in the notes there'd be a URL to a video clip to watch, but hearing her say out loud the URL is in www./.y/, it was, that was really trying at times, so I'd be getting the bus and hearing her saying, "y/the brain/ does it work/ and I was like, no, you could have just got rid of that, you know? Wasn't feeling that. So anyway, I gave it 3 out of 5 stars. It was middle of the road, enjoyable, informative, slightly a bit too academic, slightly a little bit too long, and if I needed to do a paper on it, if I was studying psychology, it would have been fascinating to find out those results in such a short, quick way. But as I wanted it for entertainment, maybe not. So I'm thinking next month with my Audibles to just take a non-fiction break from Audible. Maybe it's not the best resource to dive into non-fiction because non-fiction sometimes needs a little bit more of your time, I think. And I might try a kind of guilty pleasure read on Audible, maybe something I've read before and loved, and try it on Audible and see, because I really want to enjoy Audible. I don't want it to be tedious, and these last 2 books I picked this month made my experience more tedious than fun. So anyway, moving aside from that, and then the last book I want to talk to you about is one I finished just last night, and that is The Post-Birthday World by Lionel Shriver. Now, I mentioned this in my Dewey's 24-hour readathon because I was reading it, and it is a chunky monkey. It's 478 pages, so it has took me a lot longer to finish it than I expected, but I have really enjoyed this. So I think I'm going to give this between 3 out of 5 and 4 stars. I can't make my mind up yet because I think the structure as a whole is pretty limiting. This idea of these 2 different paths that Irina could take in her life. Does she kiss Ramsay? Does she not? And the consequences of that. I think as a device it sounds very clever, but it is limited. There's only so far you can go with it. And so as a structure and as a device, I think she did very well out of it. I think she did it well, but I don't think it's an overly ambitious or clever device in practice. In theory it sounds great, but in practice it ends up having a lot of stumbling blocks and probably quite limiting, and she could have done more original things than sticking so rigidly to the structure. However, I enjoyed the structure. One thing I will say is this book is, to me, far too long. There are certain bits in this book, no spoilers, I'm trying to not give you spoilers, but both of the characters, the male characters of Lawrence and Ramsay, Ramsay's ending, I just didn't feel like was relevant to the plot. It didn't feel believable and made the kind of ending rushed. I know it wanted to show a kind of affection built there between Irina and Ramsay, but I wasn't really buying it. She just needed to throw something rash in the mix to that kind of storyline, that fork in the road. I just didn't really believe. And there's a plot twist in Lawrence's story. Also, I didn't really believe that. I think Lawrence is a very dedicated partner. He had his shortcomings, he's a bit uptight, but I just didn't believe that ending either. That ending irritated me so much that it made me just think, well, what was the point in this book then? You're ultimately trying to say at the end of this book, which path do you think she should have took? There's pluses and minuses to both of them, reiterated in Irina's actual profession, where she's a story writer and she writes different stories in this book that both get nominated for a prize, and both of those stories deal with the two different ways you could have gone. And she keeps reiterating the book, you know, it's about there's two different forks in life, not one is worse than the other or better than the other, it's just how you end up. But because of Lawrence's plot twist, it made it almost seem like Lionel Shriver's saying, but Ramsay has to be the option, because if she stayed with Lawrence, this bad thing would have happened. So that just defuncts your whole argument. So that did irritate me a little bit. I was like, well, you're trying to be all like, I'm just being ambiguous, but you haven't made that ambiguous. You made that quite explicitly clear that she made the wrong decision if she stayed with Lawrence. So, and I like the character of Lawrence, and then in that development of him kind of being the bad guy, wasn't really a fan of him being the bad guy. I like him as the good guy, and that's just my opinion. I just preferred him to Ramsay. I would have picked Lawrence, so I feel like I'd have been shortchanged if I had. Anyway, regardless, a bit of a mulling over there. Anyway, the writing was very good. So I was transfixed. There was a bit in the book where I was racing to finish it. I was trying to read it at work on a break the other day. So it definitely had the readability factor. It's very easy to get through. I would recommend it to people because it is a very intriguing device to see what happens. And I liked Irina's character. It's fun to see the two different ways she could have gone. It's a fun experience. So the reading of it is fun, but it was faulted. So there we are. So that is all the books I read this month. I'm really sorry that that's going to be a hideously long video, but surprisingly I got through quite a lot. So I'm going to do another tag later this week, and then I'm going to do my TBR because I get excited and I like to do my TBRs for you before I start reading them. It gets me hyped and excited, and you know and I know we're all on the same page. So anyway, thank you guys so much for watching. Please hit the subscribe button if you want to be alerted when any of my future videos come out, and I'll see you very soon with a brand new video.